Welcome to Sounds with Tom Needham, the nation's premier podcast where we dive deep into the world of music, film, and social change. I'm your host, Tom Needham, and today we have a truly special guest, director Asako Gladsjo, one of the visionary filmmakers behind Eyes on the Prize 3, We Who Believe in Freedom Cannot Rest, 1977 to 2015. For decades, Eye on the Prize has set the standard for chronicling the civil rights movement, offering an unflinching look at the ongoing fight for racial and social justice in America. In the latest installment, Eyes on the Prize 3, a new generation of filmmakers explores the movement's evolution from the 1970s to 2015, an era marked by both progress and profound challenges. Asako directed the series' final episode, What Comes After Hope, which examines the years of Barack Obama's presidency and the rise of Black Lives Matter. Asako, thank you so much for joining us today on the program.
My pleasure.
This is an incredible piece of work. I want to talk a little bit about the series first and then get into your episode.
Sure.
What inspired you to get involved in this project in the first place?
Well, John Porter reached out to me, and I had over the years known people who had worked for Blackside, and they were some of my earliest mentors. And when she said they're doing a new Eyes on the Prize, and I'd like you to come on as the series producer, I felt I was unworthy. Made a lot of programs on, films, and I've definitely always been a personal, passion of mine to focus on social justice and, race in America. But I felt like, this was a landmark that was, like I said, that I was unworthy. But, she kind of insisted. And then when she brought together the directors, I ended up, directing the last episode. And it was really incredible. It was an experience that, I cherish, because not only did I get to work with these amazing directors, I mean, obviously Dawn Porter herself is incredible, but then the other directors, some of them I knew, some of them I got to meet for the first time, but I knew their work already. We all brought our passion for this subject to the project, and we also were able to bring in as advisors people who had worked on the original series, like John Else and Judy Richardson. They were both in SNCC themselves before they worked on Eyes on the Prize 1, and Callie Crossley, who was Oscar nominated for her episode about the Selma marches. So it was a really amazing experience, cross-generational, cross-cultural, and we were living through this moment. I mean, it was commissioned, the series was commissioned in 2020 in the height of, sort of the global movement in response to George Floyd's killing. And it was, it was a heady time, but it also was one that by the time we were really getting rolling on production in 2021, we could all feel the backlash coming. And we knew that this, height of the movement had provoked those who were, who had always resented the gains of the civil rights movement, who were, fearful of losing their place and their kind of control over society. They, it was not going to go well. We didn't anticipate it would go as badly as it did, but I mean, the changes coming to this country were already, we could all feel them.
Okay. For our listeners who are maybe not familiar with the legendary original series, can you just give us a little background on the original series and what you then accomplish in this new number of episodes?
Yeah. So the original series, which came out in 1987 on PBS, was really unique because people had made documentaries before about Dr. Martin Luther King or about other leaders who were very well known, who were household names, but nobody had ever done, made an effort to tell the story of the many, many, ordinary people who joined the movement and who really made change happen. And that was a unique perspective that, some of those people then became household names like John Lewis and Diane Nash. I mean, these were names that were not known before Eyes on the Prize. They were people who had been putting their bodies on the line, taking risks, doing the things that were necessary to really bring about change. And so we wanted to keep that approach. And when we approached this new series and we were trying to decide what our take was going to be, it was really important to us to keep that focus on the ordinary people, the idea that, no matter who you are and no matter where you live, you can also make change if you have, really strong values and the courage of your convictions. And so that's something that, informed everything that we did. And, we all did get a chance to, because it was sort of a different approach where these were directors who already had, bodies of work of their own. Everyone came with something that they were really passionate about and that they particularly wanted to focus on. But then we also realized that, our respect for what Eyes on the Prize had done in the past, we wanted to carry that on in a way that they would consider a true continuation of that effort. Because we knew that, although there's sort of this idea that there was a civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s, and then that we didn't need it anymore because they got the Civil Rights Act, they got the Voting Rights Act, and so everything was fine. Well, we knew that wasn't true. We knew that there had been injustice that had continued, and we knew that there had been movements that had continued, and people had organized and resisted wherever they were. And so it was important to us to keep that approach and to bring it on up to the era that we felt we still could have perspective on. I will say that we knew already when we went into it, or I certainly felt that there was no way for us to tell the history, recent as it is, of what happened in 2020, because we knew we were still in the middle of it. And like I've interviewed a lot of historians, and I remember asking Jelani Cobb, and he said, we historians, we like to let the dust settle a little.
Right.
But like I said, I really do feel like the lesson of the previous series was that, we gain perspective as the years pass. We learn from the history. And that's, kind of the mission of the whole series is to remind people this history is being made even now today, but we can understand where we are if we look at what's happened before.
The title, Eyes on the Prize, what did it mean in the original series, and has the meaning of the title changed at all this time around?
I mean, that was a exercise that we all did when we came together as a team. Was we were like, well, what is the prize? And the prize. I mean, that of course is a line from a spiritual, and it was Judy Richardson, who was one of our advisors, who had proposed it on a list of 20 other titles that were drawn from song lyrics. But the prize for most of us is freedom, dignity, justice. And so even when you have these incredible obstacles that come in your way, and you see oppression and you see unfairness and you see mistreatment, if you keep your eyes on the prize, the idea is, and you say what really counts is for us all to be able to be free and to have justice and to live in a society where we are respected and able to live decent lives. That's the prize. But I think for each of us, we came at it from our own angles. But I think, it's like, don't be distracted by the steps forward and the steps back. This is just a constant process. It's not, those who had power in this society don't give it up willingly. And so it's never a straight road ahead. It's always, a few steps forward and then a few steps back. And so keeping your eyes on the prize is what keeps you going. Otherwise, you're lost.
I found your episode particularly interesting. What comes after hope? When President Obama was elected president, there are some people that made the assumption that now that there was a black president, that all the problems have been solved. In your episode, you make the point that that's not the case. Can you explain a little bit about what you were hoping to do in this episode, and why the subject matter is so important?
Well, I also felt that incredible hope and joy when Obama was elected, because it made me think that America really had changed. And, I wouldn't have thought in the past that even at the time I thought, well, Americans they're not going to vote for the for Obama. They're not there yet. And then they did. And so it was amazing. And, that symbolic, victory, it was huge. I don't want to take away from that. It's something that was really monumental and that was moving. I mean, I dragged my little toddlers out in the freezing cold to be at that inauguration because I was like, wow, this is really change. And then, what we saw was that, with not taking away any of how monumental that was, it was not enough to address the inequality that had grown in our society since the Reagan years, the wealth disparities, the problems with our criminal justice system, mass incarceration, the way that police functioned in our society. It was a wonderful thing to have a black president, and to have a black president that we all loved, but it wasn't enough. And what was interesting was it's sort of like, the kids who saw like, this is not enough. Like, I can't, I don't have a future. How am I ever going to pay back my student loans? How am I going to protect my little brother if he goes out and a police confuses him for a criminal? And that is why they created that movement. And it was a movement that sort of bubbled up or very organically across the country as, young people who could see that this is not post-racial America. There is still racism. It's not over. That was what led to the movement that was really, became a worldwide movement. And what they were building on was the original civil rights movement. And they were very aware of the history, and they were very aware of their elders and turned to them for, advice and support and even tactics. And that's something that, I think it's a good reminder to us today. Like I said, I don't think any of us anticipated we'd be where we are right now, but when the series came out, but I think it is a reminder that, you got to just keep your eyes on the prize. You've got to
Mhm.
remember that, if you know what your values are and you care about everyone having, justice, you just can't stop fighting.
You used the term symbolic. In hindsight, do you think um, President Obama's presidency was largely a symbolic moment?
I mean, symbolic is maybe too, not quite, it doesn't encompass enough. I mean, the thing is that when a president is following the rules that are laid out in the Constitution, they can only do so much. And as soon as the Tea Party came in and, he didn't have a Congress that wanted to work with him, it was very hard for him as a president who respected the three branches of government to just force his will. And so even if he would have put in place policies that, the characters in my film would have been, happy to see, he couldn't force them down their throats if the Tea Party members of Congress were going to stand up against him. And we saw what happened. He tried to put justices on the Supreme Court, and then Mitch McConnell and others kept him from being able to do that. So it's not that he was only symbolic. I think he had good intentions, but I think that the way things happened, it's because one person shouldn't be able anyway, but certainly wasn't in that case able to make the America that we wanted to see.
Your film does an excellent job of showing how sometimes there can be one case that gets into the news that really captures everyone's attention. And then, if there are groups of activists out there who are willing to move on that story, it can make a real difference. Tell me about some of the news events that you cover in your documentary that were so memorable and so important in creating change.
Well, I think it's really, one of the things that struck me was when I was talking to one of the, slightly older generation of activists who the Black Youth Project 100 were kind of, mentored by Dr. Kathy Cohen in Chicago. She said it too. She said, my mother's generation had Emmett Till, And, I had Rodney King, and these young people, Trayvon Martin was the same for them. It was a tragedy that was so, it had so much impact on this generation because it was a kid like them who was shot by a vigilante and then got off. And that idea that there was this kind of impunity that you know kids like them could be murdered and nobody would be punished. That was something that really changed. It sort of woke up a whole generation. And so then we saw, even as this protest started to grow up around it, there were other killings that were very similar. There was Mike Brown that set off all the protests in Ferguson. And these things continued. People had their own friends, like the kids that go to the UN Committee on Torture and talk about, and lodge their petition. We charge genocide. It was because their own friend Dominique Franklin had been killed by police. And so these kinds of tragedies, we mourn them, but there are also certain ones that just set off a fire because you say, this is a bridge too far. This is something we cannot tolerate living in a country that allows this to happen. And I think that we see a lot of those instances in that episode, and this has been the case all along. I think if you look back to what Dr. Cohen said, and think about Emmett Till, there had been thousands of lynchings. There had been thousands of Black people wrongly accused of, usually of raping a white woman or offending a white woman. But Emmett Till was a child, and the fact that he was brutally murdered and his mother refused to let that be hidden and had him in an open casket. This is something like what we saw with Trayvon. It was a thing where the injustice was so egregious that even people who wanted to push that away couldn't be moved, couldn't ignore it. They had to say, what kind of country are we if we let this happen? And
This,
I think that
yeah, I'm sorry.
that's
Go ahead.
yeah, that's why those tragedies do make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your film does a really nice job of really explaining the methods by which activist groups can work together, the different tools that they have available to them, and the hard work that's involved in it. In particular, one learns a lot about civil disobedience in this movie. Can you talk a little bit about some of the examples of civil disobedience that you cover in the film? In particular, the overtaking of the Capitol building.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's amazing about these young people is how well they knew their history, and they turned to other older activists to learn some of these things. I mean, some of it they were just going on instinct, like when they marched from, to Sanford, Florida. But when they, in terms of taking over the Florida State House, they didn't really have a plan. But right away, the amazing organizers and lawyers at Advancement Project sent them grown-ups who said, this is how you hold this space. You need to make it so that people can really stay there. You need to do, and so they gave them all kinds of useful support, and they gave them, education in those tactics. Another example I love is actually when they took over the International Conference of Police Chiefs in Chicago.
Mm.
Interestingly, the Black Youth Project 100 people, they had people from Greenpeace helping them. They had people from, other older organizations who taught them things that Blackout Collective, there was other groups that came in and said, okay, if you want to hold the street open, so that they can't come through, here's pipes that you can put your hands in, but you don't want to get injured. Decide who's going to get arrested, who can get arrested, and who has to go home because they have a small child or something. And so, they learned these very practical techniques from more experienced activists. And that's something that, is really amazing to see, is that there is a whole tradition of civil disobedience that they were students and now they can teach others. Like seeing how they did it, we can actually learn from it. I was very impressed by how organized they were.
It seems like civil disobedience is really tricky, though. When people do it on the left or on the right, it seems there are people who admire it, and there are people that are like really upset by it, and it's hard to tell sometimes as the reactions come out whether sometimes it does more good or it can do more harm in terms of the way that people respond to it. What do you think is most effective about doing acts of civil disobedience? And what are some of the things that may not always work out to one's advantage?
Well, I think, it is important, like what Judith Brown Diana says in my film, is that, you can't win racial justice in the dark. So a lot of times the civil disobedience is to dramatize a problem that exists. For instance, back in the original civil rights movement, when members of SNCC sat down at segregated lunch counters and got dragged out, if it was covered by the media, people would be like, that's wrong, because they would see it happening.
Right.
But and that is of value, because people like to ignore those things, and if nobody's challenging it, it seems like everybody's fine. And so protests in the street, what difference do they make? One can ask. Certainly there was a gigantic women's march that was a huge protest when Donald Trump was elected the first time. Did it make a difference? Well, did it make people feel like there were others who shared their values? I mean, this is a whole question all the time. Like, what can you actually do when the government is against you? That is something that, sometimes it's the only choice, is just to show up and be seen and to say, I do not accept this. And then, sometimes there are other things you can do. That's why it's, very interesting that groups like Advancement Project, who are very familiar with like the courts and, with actual street organizing, there's a whole tactical structure to how they organize their resistance.
Well, this is a very powerful film series, and you kind of alluded to earlier that you never imagined that when this film came out that we would be where we're at right now. Can you just be a little bit more clear in terms of what is it that is so distressing to you right now that's going on?
Well, I just think that this idea that we are going to make America go back to how things were before the civil rights movement, that's terrifying to me. I have kids, and I care about the people around me, and I'm very frightened about what lies ahead under this second Trump presidency, where things are moving so fast, and I think it's going to take a long time to rebuild from that. So it's frightening. But what I did feel when I saw my episode again in November, this past November after the election, I thought, yes, it's a really scary time, and we may lose a lot of the progress that was made. But there is something in the courage of individuals and in small communities to resist and to really be clear on what their values are and to fight for them.
And do you think people are ready to resist again?
I don't know whether people want to have big protests in the street right now because it feels like it's so huge, but I think it's the same thing. Everyone's kind of taking stock, and there is going to be a process where we say, well, what can we do? And I think that people are still in that moment. But I know that there's many people who are not happy with what the policies that Donald Trump is putting in place, and I think that there will be resistance, but pretty hard right now.
Right.
He's
If
affecting
people,
the Constitution or any, the three branches of government or any of that. So I think people are just having to come up with a new approach.
well, in the meantime, people can learn a lot about history, recent history, by watching your series. Can you give people a place to go online to learn more about your work, and then also where they can watch this?
Okay, yeah, Eyes on the Prize 3 is showing on HBO. The first It showed on HBO this week. The last two episodes are showing today, and it's streaming on HBO Max.
Yeah, I saw it on there, so it's definitely available now. I want to thank you for taking the time. This is such an important piece of work, and there's a lot to think about. But your film is really engaging. It's just a really great film series, and I think our listeners will enjoy it and also learn quite a deal from it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Tom.